Welcome to Redefining Freedom, The Boy in a Dress, a podcast where we dive deep into the world of David Undetiwan, an artist who defies convention, explores the fluidity of identity, and celebrates the beauty of vulnerability through art, design, and personal reflection.
All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a closer look at David Undetiwan.
Yeah, this designer, he's really making a statement, isn't he?
It seems like more than just clothes, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you gave me articles, interviews, even some philosophy stuff.
Right off the bat, you can tell this deep dive is going to be different. We're not just talking fashion, we're talking about identity.
Oh, yeah, and art history, even beauty.
Exactly. It's like all these ideas coming together through this one designer.
And speaking of ideas, one thing that really stood out to me was this whole theme of androgyny.
Yeah, you pick up on that too, huh? And it's not just like a style thing for her. It feels way more like a philosophy, you know? Like it's woven into everything he does.
Absolutely, and it makes me think about the influence of Coco Chanel. She's mentioned everywhere in these sources, but it's not just like she's an inspiration.
It's deeper than that, right?
Way deeper. Undetiwan talks about her almost like a mentor, like her spirit is somehow part of his brand.
It's like she's the foundation he's building on.
So I guess that's where we should start then, right? Why Coco Chanel? I mean, we all know she was revolutionary, but what's the connection to what David Undetiwan is doing now, all these years later?
I think you have to really understand how radical she was back then. Think about it. It's the early 1900s. Women are basically trapped in these really restrictive clothes.
Corsets and all that, yeah.
Exactly. And then Chanel comes along, she's like, nope. Starts borrowing from menswear using fabrics like jersey. Can you imagine? That was for men's underwear back then.
It's like she was using clothes to make a statement.
She absolutely was. And it wasn't just fashion. She was liberating women through her designs.
So when we look at a collection like Undetiwan's The Boy in a Dress, which is obviously a pretty bold statement in itself.
Oh, totally.
Are we seeing like a direct echo of that same audacity that Chanel had?
I think so, yeah. It's like he's picking up that torch of like defying expectations and running with it.
You know, it makes you wonder how many designers are really engaging with fashion on that level. For Undetiwan, it's not just about trends. It's like he's tapping into this whole history of self-expression through clothes.
And that's where this idea of androgyny becomes really crucial, I think. For him, it goes so much deeper than just mixing masculine and feminine styles. It's more like a whole philosophy of identity.
Yeah, the sources talk about him embracing androgyny as like a way of life. But what does that even mean, you know? In practical terms, what does that look like?
It's like he's saying those traditional categories of male and female, they don't really matter. Like they're almost irrelevant. Think about how Chanel used menswear to, as we said, liberate women. Undetiwan seems to be doing the opposite. He's using these traditionally feminine elements to free men from all these rigid ideas about masculinity.
So The Boy in a Dress isn't just a provocative title. It's actually a statement about breaking free from those expectations, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And you know what's interesting? He draws all these parallels to other artists who've played with gender norms. He mentions Lady Gaga, for example, and how she uses fashion to completely transform herself, always pushing boundaries.
Oh, and the sources also mentioned Marcel Duchamp, right? The artist. He created this female alter ego, Rose Sylvie. It's wild how these ideas about challenging gender, they pop up across all these different art forms.
And there's Claude Cahun, too, the photographer. Early 1900s, Cahun's self-portraits, they really blur the lines between male and female. It's all playing with expectations, just like Undetiwan.
So we're seeing how Coco Chanel's influence, it goes way beyond just the aesthetics. It's this spirit of like revolution, you know, challenging the status quo. But then there's this whole other layer, art history. I mean, the sources are packed with references. It's like Undetiwan is in conversation with all these different art movements across time.
And he's not just name-dropping famous artists either. He seems to really get the philosophies behind these movements, like he talks about symbolism and how it connects to his use of the tulip.
As a symbol of deeper meaning.
Yeah, like there's more than meets the eye.
And there's Impressionism, which he links to capturing a feeling or a fleeting moment.
Which makes sense, right, when you think about how ethereal some of his designs are.
Totally. And then you've got Art Nouveau, with those organic forms and the influence of nature.
Right.
He even specifically mentions Alphonse Mucha, and I can definitely see that in his work. those flowing lines, the floral motifs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, as a listener, I'm already seeing fashion completely differently. It's like these clothes are carrying all this weight of history and ideas, not just the latest trends.
And that's what makes this so fascinating, right? These art movements aren't just visual references for him. They're like a whole intellectual framework for how he approaches beauty, And the purpose of art, its role in society.
Okay, so we've got Coco Chanel's rebellious spirit and this deep connection to art history. But there's one more thing here that really intrigues me. This idea of romance, and especially unrequited love, it comes up a lot in these sources. Why is that so important to David Undetiwan's vision?
Well, it's like he sees romance not just as, being in a relationship, but as this force that shapes your identity, your creativity. Think back to Coco Chanel again and her relationship with Boy Capel. It was passionate, intense, but ultimately tragic.
Yeah, and the sources say that his death, it really marked her. It's like it shaped her whole aesthetic, her outlook on life.
Right. And Undetiwan, I think he's echoing that. He talks about this sense of longing, of reaching for something you can't quite grasp as a major source of inspiration for his work.
Like he's taking that universal human experience of yearning, of wanting something unattainable and turning it into something beautiful.
Exactly. And it's interesting. Think about how this ties back into androgyny. In a way, androgyny is about embracing that incompleteness, right? Recognizing that we all have both masculine and feminine qualities within us, and they're always in flux.
So it's not about finding some perfect balance, it's about the beauty of that tension, that constant state of becoming.
Exactly, and that's what makes David Undetiwan's work so compelling, I think. It speaks to these very deep, universal experiences of longing and searching for wholeness within ourselves and in our relationships with others.
Wow, we're getting pretty deep here. But I love how we're moving beyond just the clothes and talking about these bigger ideas about identity and love and the human condition.
And that leads us to what might be the most significant thing about his work, how he's changing the way we see masculinity in the 21st century. I mean, the sources are pretty clear. He's not just designing clothes, he's trying to reshape our whole cultural understanding of what it means to be a man.
Okay, so how is he doing that? What makes his approach to masculinity so different?
He's challenging those old, rigid ideas of what a real man is supposed to be. Strong, stoic, unemotional. He's saying no to that.
He's embracing vulnerability.
Yes, and emotional depth. He's rejecting those toxic norms that tell men they can't express their full range of feelings.
So instead of seeing emotions as weaknesses, he's actually presenting them as strengths.
Exactly. He sees those qualities as essential parts of a whole, complete human being. And it's fascinating how the sources contrast him with Coco Chanel. She used menswear to liberate women, and now he seems to be using traditionally feminine elements to liberate men.
Whoa, it's like a full circle moment. A continuation of that revolutionary spirit she had.
Absolutely. And he's not alone either. There's this bigger cultural shift happening right now, this move towards inclusivity and self-expression. Designers like Jean-Paul Gaultier, they've been paving the way for decades, but Undetiwan is definitely pushing that conversation even further.
It makes you wonder what kind of impact this could all have on how we see masculinity in the future. It's like he's at the forefront of this quiet revolution.
He really is. And I think the most exciting part is that we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in his work and the ideas behind it.
So for our listeners out there, I'm curious, what stands out to you about David Undetiwan's work so far?
Sure.
What resonates with you? What challenges your assumptions?
We'd love to hear your thoughts as we continue to unpack this fascinating designer's vision. It's interesting, isn't it, how this idea of challenging masculinity, it kind of goes back to that whole unrequited love thing we were talking about. It seems really important to David Undetiwan.
Oh yeah, for sure. The sources mention it constantly. It's almost like there's this underlying sadness, this longing that runs through so many of his designs.
And it makes you think maybe that sense of unfulfilled desire, that ache of wanting what you can't have, maybe that's actually where his creativity comes from.
That's a really cool thought. Like the fact that the love is impossible makes it even more powerful, and that fuels his art.
Right. Think about Coco Chanel and Boy Capel again. So passionate, so intense, but ultimately a tragic love story. He died so young.
And the sources suggest that his death, it had a huge impact on her, like it shaped her entire aesthetic, her outlook on life. It's like that unfulfilled love became this driving force for her.
Exactly. And you see those same ideas, that same feeling in David Undetiwan's work. This longing, reaching for something just out of reach. It kind of permeates everything he designs.
It's like he's taking that universal experience, that yearning for something more, something you can't quite attain, and he's turning it into beauty, into inspiration.
And it's fascinating how this all ties back to androgyny, too, because in a way, androgyny is about embracing that incompleteness, right? We all have these masculine and feminine qualities inside us, and they're always shifting, never fully settled.
So it's not about finding some perfect balance. It's more about the beauty of that tension, of constantly evolving.
Exactly. And I think that's a big part of why David Undetiwan's work is so captivating. It speaks to this deep, universal human experience of longing, of searching for wholeness, both within ourselves and in our relationships with other people.
We're getting pretty philosophical here.
Yeah.
But I love it. It's like we're going beyond the surface, beyond just clothes, and talking about these really fundamental questions about identity and love and what it means to be human.
And that brings us to what might be the most important aspect of all of this, really. This idea that David Undetiwan is creating a whole new era, like a revolution in how we view masculinity.
Yeah, the sources don't shy away from that at all. He's not just making clothes. He's actually trying to change how we understand what it means to be a man.
It's like he's saying, we need a new definition, one that embraces vulnerability and emotional depth. One that rejects those toxic norms that have held men back for so long.
He's saying we need to rethink what it means to be a man in the 21st century.
Exactly. And it's perfect timing because this is happening everywhere right now, isn't it? This huge cultural shift towards inclusivity, self-expression, breaking down these rigid gender roles that are so limiting.
We see it in music, movies, TV, even politics. It's like everyone's hungry for something that reflects a more authentic, more nuanced way of being human.
And that's what David Undetiwan is tapping into. He's offering this vision of masculinity that's both radical and really resonant.
Okay, so let's say this new era of masculinity actually happens. What does it look like? What does it feel like?
Well, I think first and foremost, it means we finally accept and celebrate vulnerability in men.
So instead of seeing emotions as weaknesses, we see them as strengths. Real strength comes from being in touch with your whole range of feelings.
Exactly. And it means letting go of all those outdated ideas about what men should be. Strong, stoic, never showing emotion.
We trade those limiting stereotypes for something much more fluid, more inclusive. A vision of masculinity where men can be themselves, fully and authentically, without being judged or ridiculed for it.
And this new masculinity, it challenges this idea that men always need to be dominant, in control.
So instead, we start valuing collaboration, empathy, a willingness to be vulnerable with the people in our lives.
It's masculinity that's both strong and gentle, powerful but compassionate.
A lot of people are ready for that, I think.
You really are. It makes you realize David Undetiwan, he's not just a fashion designer, he's like a cultural visionary.
He's helping to create a world where men can be their full selves, free from all that toxic masculinity.
Now that's a revolution worth fighting for.
You know, the sources make this really interesting comparison between Undetiwan and Coco Chanel.
Yeah.
They say he's like the yang to her yin.
That's a great way to put it. Chanel challenged traditional femininity by using those masculine elements in her designs. Undetiwan is doing something similar, but in reverse.
He's taking those traditionally feminine qualities, softness, vulnerability, emotional depth, and using them to redefine what it means to be masculine.
Like he's completing the circle, creating this more balanced, harmonious vision of how we express gender.
And it's not just about the look, right? It's a whole new way of thinking about gender, about identity.
Exactly. David Undetiwan, he's challenging us to move beyond those rigid categories of male and female. He's saying, let's embrace a more fluid, inclusive way of understanding ourselves.
It's about recognizing that we all have both masculine and feminine qualities inside us, and they're not opposites, but complementary.
And celebrating the beauty and the power of that complexity.
He's saying stop trying to fit yourself into these boxes and embrace who you truly are.
That's a message that speaks to everyone, no matter how they identify.
It's about liberation, self-acceptance, being your true self.
A message that could change the world, really.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like we've only just started to understand the depth and complexity of David Undetiwan's work.
There's so much more to uncover. His designs, the ideas behind them, it's all so thought-provoking.
So, for our listener, what's sticking with you? What stands out about David Undetiwan's work?
What parts resonate with you and what makes you question your own assumptions?
We really want to hear what you're thinking. You know what's amazing to me It's how David Undetiwan brings all these different threads together, the history, the philosophy, the personal stuff, and he makes it into something visually stunning.
Yeah, like he's tacked into some core part of what it means to be human, you know? That yearning for connection, for beauty, for something more than just everyday life.
And he does it in a way that feels both really current and somehow timeless.
Totally. He's speaking to what's going on right now, with everyone questioning these traditional gender roles and looking for more genuine ways of being themselves.
But at the same time, he's drawing on these age-old ideas about beauty and love and the human soul, stuff that's resonated with people for centuries.
It's like he's found this way to connect the personal and the universal, you know? The individual and the whole of humanity.
And he's doing it all through fashion, which, let's be honest, people usually think of as superficial and trendy.
Right, but Undetiwan is showing us it can be so much more than that.
It can be this powerful way to express yourself, to comment on society, to explore those big questions about who we are and what it means to be human.
And that's what makes his work so powerful. It's not just pretty clothes, it's starting a conversation. It's making you challenge your own ideas and see the world differently.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes. I feel like I get it now, the artistry and thought that goes into David Undetiwan's work.
I hope our listeners are feeling that too. We've covered a lot, from Coco Chanel's influence to this whole idea of androgyny and what a new era of masculinity could look like.
But it doesn't have to end here, right? I'd encourage everyone to go back to the sources we talked about, do some more digging, and most importantly, just keep thinking about all this and how it connects to your own life.
Because in the end, what matters is how these ideas spark something in you, how they challenge your assumptions and maybe inspire you to live a more authentic, fulfilling life.
Undetiwan has said he sees his work as a quiet revolution, and maybe that revolution starts with each of us, with embracing who we are, the good and the bad, and all the messy stuff in between.
So yeah, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of David Undetiwan.
Until next time.